Welcome back to another episode of Lessons in Leverage, where we explore the skills, mindsets, and strategies that help us achieve more with less. I'm your host, Spencer Lowe. Ever wonder why people react so strongly to potential losses compared to equivalent gains? Today, we're diving into a principle that is crucial for consultants and decision makers alike: the psychology of gains and loss frames. In this episode, you'll learn how to leverage this understanding to navigate client relationships and project management more effectively.
Welcome to Lessons in Leverage, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of success. We'll help you unlock the secrets of leverage so you can amplify your impact in the world. Here's your host, Spencer Lowe.
Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky were two incredible researchers who looked at economics and said, okay, all of economics are based on this idea that people behave rationally. But we see all sorts of evidence that people don't always behave rationally. And so they created this whole new field of behavioral economics that really studied and uncovered in a reliable, provable way that there are specific sets of circumstances where people don't behave rationally. And they created a list, or I should say, they defined the category of what are these different biases people have and how do they affect their decision making. So if you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend a book called The Undoing Project, because they go through all the research they did, what they observed, why they did the experiments, how it's used, and how it can be practical. It's a book I found a ton of value from. But I want to talk just today about gains frames and loss frames, which really apply to us in many, many ways. So I'm just going to give you a few tactics for why this is a philosophy that we focus on and how we use this. So the first thing, when I read the book, I started thinking about what gains frames and loss frames meant. And to give you a quick summary of the principle around gains frames and loss frames, when we see things as a potential gain versus seeing it as a potential loss, we don't value it, or our emotional experience with it is not the same. And because our emotions are different, we actually make different choices rationally. More accurately, irrationally, we make different choices. So for example, if someone's given the choice between possibly gaining $100 or possibly losing $100, they're going to be more likely to avoid the loss than they would be to pursue the gain. In fact, let's say that someone lost $1,000 on an investment. Studies show that they would need to make 1.5 to 2.5x for an equivalent positive emotional response to be break even. So they need to make 1.5x, so 1,500 to 2,500 on an investment, just to have break-even emotional state. So a lot of times we would think, well, if I lose $1,000, but then I gain $1,000, I'm going to feel great, like I'm in the same place. You won't. You'll actually feel net negative, having lost 1,000 and gained 1,000. And so that will emotionally not be the same experience. The negative, the loss of 1,000, will be more traumatic and more painful than the gain of 1,000 will be pleasurable or desirable. And the order doesn't matter. You can do it first, gain 1,000, then lose 1,000. In both cases, there's going to be a net deficit emotionally. Well, I shouldn't say the order doesn't matter. It does matter a little bit to the end state, but my point is just, it doesn't change the theory around gains and loss frames and what impact they have on us emotionally. So when you understand that that's the premise, gains and losses are not valued equally. A $100 loss, not the same as a $100 gain. Well, how does that apply to us? The first way that it applies is really, really important, because what they found is, because we're so averse to losses, we will behave more irrationally to avoid a loss than we will to pursue a gain. And so with our clients, sometimes we start the project through a gains frame almost always. More or less, we're starting always through this lens of, here's what you have to gain out of this project. And because of that, they're very rational about the potential ROI, the potential challenges. It all makes sense. It's all very reasonable. But then they get into the project and something doesn't go the way they expect, or scope shifts, and now they need a change order, or something's happening that makes them feel a little worried, like, oh no, what if I lose all this money I'm investing? What if my boss thinks worse of me because I failed this project or totally messed it up? They start thinking or having something occur that puts them in that loss frame. Maybe their boss says, you're going to lose your job if you don't hit this date, right? That'll put someone in a loss frame. So things occur that put them in a loss frame, and then they show up to a meeting all of a sudden, or they send an email that makes no sense. And you're like, whoa, they're freaking out. Like, they're so angry at me. What is this? We were just on a call last week and they seemed happy. What's happened is they've shifted into a loss frame. Could have just been their own thought process, could have been some external stimuli, but something has happened that pushed them into a loss frame. And so they're not viewing it rationally right now. And if you just argue with them and they stay in a loss frame, they're not going to be rational about resolving it either. So there's a very specific set of steps you can take to addressing this with them. You need to validate their emotions, meet them where they're at, and then uncover what it is that they're scared of losing. And if you can do that, you can address that loss frame and get them back to a gains frame, and now you're going to be in a really productive situation to thrive and succeed together. We can spend more time later on. This isn't going to be a full training on these things. I just want to introduce the ideas because they're core philosophies to how we operate. So when a client's being irrational, the first way to use gains and loss frames is to reverse engineer. Let me validate their emotions, help them feel safe, so I can then figure out what's driving this loss frame that they're in, and then I can really make sure to address that thing and put them in a good position. Because sometimes they're freaking out about you about something on the project, but really they're just scared about losing their job. If that's the case, then my messaging them is going to be like, here's what we can do right away to make sure your boss feels better about the project. It's not going to be, here's what we're going to do to change the configuration. They might be asking me about the configuration because they're trying to get control back and not feel like they're going to lose. But that might not be the thing to focus on. So that's why we validate, wow, like I totally get where you're coming from. This sounds really scary, sounds really frustrating, etc. And tell me a little more about that. What prompted you to reach out to us about this? Let's see if we can get to the core of it. When we figure out what's really creating that feeling of a loss frame, now it's going to be really easy to address. So that's a way to use it. Number one, reverse engineer someone that's behaving irrationally and find out why they're in a loss frame. And that's useful all throughout life, but certainly with clients. The second way we're going to use it is it's going to affect how we present options and choices to our customers or even to people on our team. When you want to present a choice or a set of choices, which should be every time we have a project management conversation, if the client asks for scope that was not in the original scope, I'm going to always give them 3 options. Because when we give options, people feel more in control, which puts them in a gains frame, which allows them to make a rational decision. But I'm going to be a little tricky in the way that I do this because I want to make sure they choose the thing that is best for them and honestly probably best for us. It's the best all around. And so I'm not just going to present all 3 options in any old frame or all 3 in a gains frame. I'm going to present 2 of the options in a loss frame and 1 in a gains frame. And then I'm going to see what happens because most of the time they're going to choose the gains frame because the pressure is going to be towards the gains frame. And here's what I mean. They will want to avoid the losses. So let's say that there's some new scope that's come up on the project. And now I believe that's what's in their best interest is to not attack that problem right now. And the reason I believe that is because if we do a change order, now we're going back and asking their boss for more money when they haven't seen any results yet. That's going to push their boss into a loss frame. You don't have to explain that theory to your customer, but that's why we don't want to do this. Anytime that we don't have something to show value-wise to say, hey, you got a return on your money, now let's ask for more money. When we say, hey, you spent a bunch of money with us and we need more money now to get you what you thought you were going to get originally, that's a bad feel. And that's going to put them in an irrational state in a loss frame. So what we're trying to do is help them manage the state of their boss or the financial decision maker, or maybe they are the financial decision maker. And so what we do is we say, look, here's what happened. Here was our original understanding. You've highlighted something that's truly critical and we want to do for you. We are excited. We believe that is a high value thing. We're going to do that for you. But there's a few different options about how we approach getting that done. Option 1 is that we put that in the backlog. We finish all the original build that we knew about. And then we make a decision on, do we want to add that on before go live? Or do we want to go live and do that in a phase 2? Or is there another thing that came up? Because guess what? Just like we found something now that we didn't know about, we'll probably find a few more things throughout the project. And so in case there's limited budget for like a phase 2, we can then prioritize and decide, is this still the top priority thing? And so what's great about doing this option of putting it in the backlog is we still can do it. We can do it at the right time under the right priority. And the best part is you're going to look like a rock star because before you go ask your boss for money, we're going to make sure all the original stuff they thought they were getting, they get it and they're excited about it. And then by giving them that great experience, what I found is that usually clients where we do that, then their boss is willing to cut significantly more checks to get more and more value. The best way to have this project blow up is if we start moving the needle and constantly asking for more money, but we haven't delivered the initial scope yet. At some point, the financial stakeholder is going to say, hey, well, we're spending all this money. Are we ever going to get the value? And they're not going to keep signing checks. And if they stop signing checks, we stop doing work, and then the project fails. And that's not going to make you look good, right? So the point is, all of the upside of doing it this way was presented in the gains frame. So I present to them everything they have to gain by putting it in the backlog. And it's all very rational, and they're going to think rationally about it because they get all the value they originally thought they were going to get, plus they get the additional value in the scope that we identified. That's all gains frame. Now, when I started talking about why option 2, I already seeded this, but option 2 would be that we go ask for money now, and we do a change order and we get some additional budget approved so that this can get built right now. And as soon as I started talking about that, you notice I talked about option 2 in a loss frame. I said, if we do that, they're going to be spending more money having not gotten anything yet for what they did. They're going to be worried about whether or not we're effective on the project. So I'm hinting at loss of reputation. I'm hinting at loss of money. I'm hinting at the increased risk, because all those are things that are scary that they don't want to lose. And I don't want them to choose this option because this option is genuinely not a good option. For the most part, changing scope mid-project is risky and only makes it more likely that they'll fail. So we got to be disciplined about sticking to some original scope and getting that over the finish line, because that informs how likely they are to be successful on phase 2. If they can't agree to a scope in phase 1 and get it over the finish line within a proposed budget, what makes them think they're going to do that in phase 2? So we have to help them see that this is a scarier option. It's a riskier option. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary, in which case we'll still do it. But we really don't recommend this option. But we didn't just say, oh, here's what's great about this option, and we don't recommend it. We framed it in a loss frame. And then we can give them option 3. And in this case, let's say that option 3 is, we can do the work now that you want done, but we have to take something else out of scope so that we don't increase the budget at all. And as we discuss that, again, what are they saying? Okay, I'm getting what I want, but I have to lose something to get it. So this is still less desirable. It's more desirable than the complete loss frame we just did on option 2. Option 3, it's a little more desirable because I get what I want, but I have to give up something to get it, which means I got to go tell the financial stakeholder, like, I cut something that they originally scoped in out, or get their buy-in on that. And that may or may not go well. I might be nervous about that. So now, there's a loss associated with getting what I want there. So what we've done is we've given them 3 options, 2 of which have a loss frame associated with them, 1 of which is in a gains frame. Which one do you think they're going to choose the majority of the time? Most of the time, they're going to take the recommendation and go with the gains frame, which is, let's put that in the backlog and revisit it at the end of the project and make a decision on what's best. And now we have no risk. We're able to just do the project we originally wanted to do. We've mitigated the risk, and we can delight the customer and then earn ourselves budget for phase 2. So this is a really key way to use gains and loss frames. You can do it in any set of circumstances. You can even do it with architectural things. You could build it this way or this way or this way. Whichever one you highlight, the gains they're going to get is going to feel very different than the losses. Imagine you go to the doctor, and the doctor gives you 2 options for your treatment or 3 options for your treatment. And he says, all right, there's 3 different treatment paths. There's surgery, there's a medication, and there's a rehab option. The surgery option has a 90% success rate. The pharmaceutical option has a 30% failure rate, where you have really bad side effects 30% of the time, but then we can work our way through those until we find the right dosage, and then usually side effects go away. And the rehab option only has a 20%, has an 80% failure rate. So let's say the rehab option has an 80% failure rate. The pharmacological option has a 30% chance of side effects. And then the surgery option has a 90% success rate. So that feels like the best option is surgery, pretty clearly, because it's 90% success rate. I don't want to have a bunch of side effects I don't want to have. I don't want to do something in rehab that has a very low chance of succeeding. So just based on the way I framed the percentages and the options, I'm pushing someone into surgery with that choice. But the thing is, that may not be optimal. What might be optimal is I should probably do rehab first at a 20% chance of success, because if I succeed on rehab, I don't have to pay for any other stuff, and I have no interventions, which long-term probably minimizes my potential residual issues. And if I ask what happens in the 80% of cases in rehab, the answer is probably, well, it just doesn't work. If I ask what happens in the 10% of failures on the surgery option, which is the opposite of what he said, maybe that's like, well, they're crippled for life, or maybe there's residual long-term pain or whatever. Okay, well, now that affects how I think about this. So if the doctor were to give me the same options and said, hey, you got your surgery option, your pharmaceutical option, and your rehab option. Surgery option has a 10% chance of severe lifelong irreparable harm, but 90% of the time it works out. The pharmaceutical option has a 30% chance of side effects, but eventually we'll figure out, we'll be able to reduce those. And the rehab option has no risk of long-term adverse effects, but it only works 20% of the time. Again, I've just slightly tweaked how I'm presenting the options, and all of a sudden rehab seems like an obvious choice. Because okay, 20% of the time it fixes it all the way, and I have no chance of losing anything. Whereas the other two, I have 10% chance of serious long-term injury or pain, and I have a 30% chance of serious side effects. Wow, this is by far the best option. All of these, it's the same information I gave in the first example, but I only made one change, which was I changed from a gains to a loss frame. I spoke about the loss frame on the surgery option, and I moved the rehab option to a gains frame. So if you just adjust the gains and losses perceptions, it really wildly influences how people go about choosing what path to take. Our goal is to actually help people make the best choice. But if you don't know how gains and loss frames work, then you will accidentally push people in the wrong direction by simply framing it wrong. And if you don't know how they work, you might hear someone really angry and think, oh, they're angry because this thing doesn't work. I'm going to fix it and make it work. When in reality, they're angry because they're scared they're going to lose their job, or they're scared that the project's not going to hit its timeline, or there's something they know you don't know that you didn't even dig in and find out that is actually put them in a loss frame. And if you can just shift them back to a gains frame, they'd do the whole thing differently. They might even choose to have you not spend time on that and to do something totally different.
Hey, before you go, I have a small request. Our mission is to empower as many people as possible to maximize their potential through the power of leverage. Could you help us in this mission by leaving a review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube? And if you know just one person who would benefit from today's episode, would you please share it with them? Your support means the world to us, and we are thrilled to have you in the community. Thank you for being a part of our journey and helping us grow. You can find show notes for today's show and past shows at lessonsinleverage.com, which also has links to connect with me personally and connect with our various podcast channels across your favorite social networks. A big thanks to Solve.cloud, who sponsored this episode. They're a group of expert consultants that help SaaS and financial services companies to implement, optimize, and manage Salesforce.com. They can help you with custom integration solutions and are helping customers to implement some of the most important generative AI technologies. You can find them at solved.cloud. That's SOLVD.cloud is the URL. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.